I know it's been a little while, but welcome to the next episode of Pop Culture Therapy.
Yes, as we promised at the end of our last video, we would be giving a therapy session today on just Star Wars fandom, which, admittedly, with episode 9 wrapping up filming, the trolls are back online.
And for anyone who's tuning in for the first time, I am Cruellica Kain.
And I am Advent Nebula.
And yes, we're voiceless bodies, and someday we may do an actual podcast with video, but right now I just still don't feel like putting on makeup.
Yes. So before we get to our little transgression on the therapy chair that the Star Wars fans...
transgression sounds fancy.
Yeah. For those Star Wars fans that have come out of the woodworks yet again, what has your week basically been, or should I say week and a half since our last recording?
I know, a week and a half, but I would say for myself, I've caught up on most of the shows I've been watching, except for Promised Neverland, only because I want to binge that one. I've also actually started watching The Umbrella Academy on Netflix, which, pop culture-wise, I have to say they give a lot of really good nods to intrigue, sci-fi, fantasy, comic books, amazingly. And I know it's based on something else, but it's first time I've heard of it.
It's a comic series written by the lead singer of My Chemical Romance.
Oh, that! Okay, now I get why there's so many emo elements. Not that emo's bad, because I actually do like My Chemical Romance, some of My Chemical Romance's songs, but it's actually really interesting because it's such a big comic book thing, and it's interesting how the diverse characters work. I definitely recommend. I'm only in 3 episodes in, so hopefully it doesn't turn to shit by the next time we do a podcast. But so far, I would recommend it.
Yeah, for me, outside of when we went to see Gundam NT...
Oh, yes, Gundam NT. We did do that, too.
on Tuesday. I really haven't been able to do a lot. My gacha games are over on their Valentine events, so I was pretty much focusing on those most of the week outside of Gundam NT. Didn't really do any gaming. Saw Anthem had its beta test before its launch on this Tuesday. And boy, was I watching in the background some of the streamers just go through. This game's going to be a mess at launch. And I've heard day one patch, I'm like, EA's not going to have this fixed and ready to go. And then seeing that the entire full game they have planned is not going to launch until July, this is going to be a nightmare.
For Gundam NT, I definitely want to do something for it later when we have an episode that'll focus on doing a therapy session on Gundam universe, because you have so many dynamic characters. I do want to point out one comment that Silver Quill had said that at the end of the movie when we watched it, I thought was fantastic. And that was, the more and more that we watch Gundam for Universal Century, we now need a glossary to define the characters, the mechs, everything.
Especially with the timeline, because the timeline that is out currently starts with Gundam Origin, which is more recent, goes all the way to Turn A, but now they're filling in all these gaps with stories that have been written post what Tomino had from Zeta and Double Zeta's era, and it's just... Yeah, Silver Quill had it right. You're going to need a glossary just to focus on the UC timeline now.
But we did see a cool thing at the end of the movie, which was a trailer for Hathaway's Flash. So any big Gundam fans, maybe if you didn't get a chance to see NT, I know it's going to be coming out, I think, in May this year.
May is the Blu-ray release.
But I do know that they did say next year.
Well, winter in Japan this year. December is the target launch for Hathaway's Flash. Not a guarantee. It might be January 2020, but it's going to be the first of the 3 Hathaway's Flash movies that are coming out.
So that will be kind of exciting and depressing all at the same time, because if you know what Hathaway's Flash is, you know some of the story elements. But I am looking forward to seeing more Gundam. It actually revived my interest, so my goal probably next month is to rewatch 00.
Yeah, 00 for you. For me, I want to get the G Gundam set and watch through that because I need my cheesy Gundam.
Well, duh. There's one. My favorite Gundam is the American Gundam, not because I like football or anything, but because I think it's like the most ostentatious of the realistic Gundams because it really does stereotype Gundams. I was waiting for it to have a sword that was in the shape of either a baseball bat or a slice of pizza.
And then you have Tequila Gundam, which isn't the most racist Gundam ever.
No, never. That sombrero does not say stereotyping at all.
And if you get the limited edition through Right Stuff, you get a Tequila Gundam shot glass. I'm not joking.
That I would get it just because I want the shot glass. But all right, well, that's actually, I think for me, outside of, I have to admit, I did get a fill up on Judge Judy because pop culture wise, Judge Judy is absolutely hilarious because I've been to law school, I've been to courts, and Judge Judy is so not realistic to what you see in the courtroom, but she is beyond awesome. But I think that's all I have.
Yeah, I really don't have anything else to go on other than looking forward to on the comments for anybody that's going to the Fate Grand Order Fest this weekend. Actually, I think it's starting in about an hour in California for the festival, running through Sunday. Kind of curious to see what people online are talking about on that. Now, Star Wars. Oh, dear God, fanboys. I don't even know where to begin.
Well, I would say first you either need Star Wars fanboys. You either need two things, and these are the extreme fanboys, not just Star Wars fanboys or Star Wars fan in general. These are the extremists, as like everything, you have extremists. The extremists, in my personal opinion, either need a swift kick in the ass or a hug. Don't know if you should have one or the other, or maybe both. To backtrack on my fan perspective, because yours is older than mine, Evan.
Yes.
I am kind of a newer fan. While I was born in the era, actually, I was born around the time that 2 and 3 came out. Don't think about years, please don't. I never really watched them as a kid because my family wasn't into Star Wars. So my first relevancy into sci-fi shows was Star Trek. Especially Next Generation, which still favorite for me. But segueing off, my first Star Wars movie was The Phantom Menace.
I am so sorry.
Not to say that's a good thing, but that was my first, and thankfully Kaiji Okami educated me fairly quickly, and I saw the original trilogy. So I will admit my fandom is relatively new, and I'm not as diehard as Avid Nebula, Silver Quill, Kaiji Okami, because Kaiji Okami himself has rebought the trilogy at least 5 times in the many, many years that we've been together. Because he has to have every format, every box set, every option available in existence. So when I look at the first trilogy, I didn't see the fanboyisms there. How about yourself?
Oh, I've seen it, and I can understand it because for myself and my perspective, my dad's a Star Wars fan. He had me watch it growing up when it ran on TV, when it was the original cuts before the Lucas cuts came out in '97 when he had the special editions come out. And then I've become one of these that's more of a fan of the original trilogy, and I like the newer trilogy coming out. Just never been too much of a fan of that prequel trilogy that Lucas put out. But as somebody who goes into this fandom, I've loved the extended universe and the books that have come out. I can understand why they've been pulled back from being an actual canon, because there never truly was a Star Wars canon until Disney really purchased the license for being able to put the product out there. But you got the extremist fans, and I've never considered myself an extremist fan of Star Wars. I'm somebody who enjoys it because I enjoy good sci-fi stories, and it is, yes, it's a very generic type of story for the original trilogy and what we're seeing with the new trilogy of the hero's tale.
Dances with wolves.
Exactly. But for me, looking at the fans that just don't accept the prequel trilogy because of what it did to the extended universe canon that they had in their heads, or even the new trilogy with what Disney's doing with 7, 8, and 9, all these people had what they wanted in perspective from what was written in novels that, frankly, the canon is not there anymore, guys. Forget about it. Just go with what's coming out now. It's actually streamlined it for the better.
Well, and truthfully, as a huge Harry Potter fan, which someday we'll get into that therapy session at some point, maybe down the road, but briefly, as a huge Harry Potter fan, I can understand the love for fan fiction, for creativity, because there were things lacking in the final novel. But at the same time, my philosophy, and this is what's always confused me about the Star Wars universe, is because I'm so relatively new with it as well, I've only looked at the movies, the animated series, as true canon, because that's how I was educated, that's how I was informed, and that's what was expressed to me. And knowing that there's a huge market of books,
and comic series as well.
Comic series. And the hard part with comic series is very rarely can they make that canon unless the actual licensing company says, okay, we're going to put your stories in the canon. Which even My Little Pony doesn't get that option with their comics. And for the video games, from what I've been told, those are not canon either.
Nope, they originally had the Rogue Squadron games as canon until Disney's purchase of the Star Wars license. Knights of the Old Republic is still in that iffy if it's canon or not. Nobody has acknowledged whether it is or not because it takes place so far in the past in the Star Wars universe. It can work either way, but characters that have it popped up from the 2 BioWare games with their names being briefly mentioned in the Clone Wars and some of the other animated series like Rebels.
So, giving the background of the movies, of our experiences within the fandom, this is where I really want to get into the therapy chair aspect. As in a therapist aspect, most therapists will always say the same thing. I respect where you're coming from and I respect where you're going. And I'm not going to stay serious because we're really not serious in half of these damn episodes. Well, we're serious, but we try to make it fun so it's not listening to stereo instructions. But at the same time, the one serious thing I want to say before we get back into a regular thing is don't bring death threats into your fandom.
Especially when you're chasing actors doing their job off of Twitter. Last Jedi just showed that. I think 2 of the actresses, if I remember right...
One of the Asian actresses, most specifically.
Yeah.
I think from Korea or China.
I can't remember where the actress that played Rose is from, but she got chased off Twitter by angry fans. And you're starting to see some of these angry fans come out of the woodworks again, just because of the way they received The Last Jedi.
And I understand pop culture, as we had talked about in their last episode, with pop culture and fandoms. We love our fandoms. We have such passion for our fandoms. We really, really want the best for it. We want to see the highest quality. I think that's why so many people, sidetracking again, but coming back into it, were so disappointed and pissed with the DCEU, or CU, DC
Extended Universe.
Extended Universe, yeah. People were so disappointed with the quality of the Batman and Superman movie and the other Superman movie. So I understand where people are coming from. You want the best, you want the highest quality, but you also have to consider one thing. Are you wanting high quality because that's what you receive via nostalgia? Or are you wanting high quality because you actually want to see a great piece of work? And with the Star Wars fandom, in my opinion, from looking from the outside in, is I see so much animosity that we, because I'll make it generalized, hold the original trilogy in such reverence that they can do no wrong. They are the greatest pieces of cinema. And I will agree, having watched them, they are fantastic storytelling. I do think there's a lot of cheesiness with it, but the core feeling of it is great.
Yeah. And even episodes 7 and 8, no matter what you think on Last Jedi, they still hold the core values of what the storytelling was. Even the prequel trilogy about the downfall of the hero's tale holds that philosophy still true. Yes, the prequel trilogy isn't that great. I like the original trilogy, but even I'll admit Return of the Jedi has its flaws. Even New Hope has some flaws in it as well, but with episodes 7 and 8, yeah, they're not perfect either, but they still hold the core truth to what the stories are about. And if they're still holding to that, then yes, it's holding to what the intent of the story is. And that's what some people that have their nostalgia for just the original trilogy and can't accept the prequel or the new trilogy just can't get out of their heads.
Well, I think the funniest thing for me on the Star Wars fandom, not going to the sad part with the or disappointing part with the death threats. I actually want to go on the funny part of their extreme enthusiasm at the same time. Because we're going to flip-flop a lot because there's so much to this particular fandom. The funniest thing for me is I was watching on Kelly and Michael, you know, Regis and Kathy Lee, that show. Well, Kelly Ripa had a fan. Episode 7 had not even been finished. You just saw a trailer for it. And this one gentleman, so diehard and in love with Star Wars, just basing it off a trailer, got a full tattoo of Rey's face from a trailer clip. And it amazes me the absolute love for a fandom, because any of the fandoms that we had talked about in their last episode, anime fans or Doctor Who or comics, and yes, people have a lot of comic book or video game tattoos, but when it comes to actually real life people outside of your family members, like your kids, which, my personal opinion, putting an actual human being's face on your body as a tattoo doesn't look as good as like an animated face, because too much realism doesn't work. But the passion there for something that doesn't even fully exist yet is so compelling. And
we've had that forever with Star Wars fandom as well. Mm-hmm. Even fanboys took a jab at the joke with Jar Jar Binks and Seth Rogen's character. I mean, this is something that has been going on for a long time, because the passion for this fan base and what George Lucas created is really like nothing else we have in American pop culture.
But I will admit, I feel bad for fans that, not in a disappointing way, but some of the fans are so diehard that like George Lucas could do no wrong. George Lucas, if you ever watched a documentary on him, I knew they had it on Netflix before. It was such a fascinating tale. He actually went to court and was one of the people who went to court to prevent It's a Wonderful Life from being colorized. He wanted to keep it in its original black and white format. Obviously, he lost, but he himself at that time, and I think it was in the 80s, was so dedicated to the preservation of its original media.
It wasn't just A Wonderful Life, it was several other films in the Turner catalog. He did not want Ted Turner to colorize.
And then we get from, and I didn't experience this firsthand, so your and Kaijin Okami's anger and anguish over this is really the experience of when George Lucas took his original film prints and adapted them to make changes.
And he put these changes in because he wanted the actual full scripts of what he wrote to get realized because at the time the technology wasn't there for it, or it was stuff that they were like, no, you got to cut that. He actually got his full scripts of the original trilogy when he made these special editions, but the CGI and the stuff, it just doesn't match.
And I will admit, having seen both now, I'm fascinated by it because I do understand the frustration. And that's a fandom thing that I do think is legitimate, though. If fans do have a right to be angry, to be frustrated, especially newer fans like myself, who up until recently never got to see the original core contents of anything. And seeing it, it is a little frustrating because you're like, well, you have now the change of Han didn't shoot first. You have
the addition of Jabba, who was kind of this phantom character until Return of the Jedi, put into the first film, kind of just kills Han's character arc.
So, a next thing I want to talk about fandom-wise, because this is the most confusing Star Wars fandom thing that makes no sense to me, and hopefully you can add to it. Boba Fett. In my thought process, because I've watched the movies multiple times now, I only remember Boba Fett speaking like maybe 3-4 lines.
4 lines of dialogue.
And he dies pretty rapidly from coming on screen.
Yeah.
But they make him seem threatening in the movie, and I know they do this bait and switch for a lot of movies, make him seem threatening, and then he turns out to be useless.
Well, and also keep in mind, what was his debut in? The Star Wars Christmas special.
Oh, yes, which we'll talk about that later, because that was a nightmare untold to man. But nevertheless, so yes, we get him in the Star Wars Christmas special. If you've never seen it before,
save yourself.
I personally say definitely check it out, especially if your parents were alive and of a certain age in the 70s, because you can look at them like, what did you do? But nevertheless, what is the fascination with this character who spoke 4 lines, died rapidly, and died a really
He got knocked into death. He got knocked out by a blind guy.
By accident!
Yeah.
By accident! That's what amazes me. Fandom! Star Wars fandom. If you could see me right now, I'm pointing at all of you. What is your fascination with Boba Fett? I don't get this, and it's one of these pop culture things that still mystifies me, because the only time I've actually found Boba Fett funny was in Robot Chicken, where he's playing with the lightsabers. I got a red lightsaber, I got a blue lightsaber. What does that make? Purple rain. That's the only time I found him funny.
Well, for you, on Boba Fett, like, cool design, and of any character in the old expanded universe, he got the most comics and novels written about to expand the lore of him and the Mandalorian race as a whole. That's where the popularity comes from, and it's not just Boba Fett that became popular. The entire Mandalorian race and lore has become just one of the most popular aspects of the Star Wars fandom. But it amazes me that a character like Boba Fett ended up just spawning so much for a character that is so minor.
Well, it amazes me, and I understand being, once again, a personal fan of fan fiction. I love fan fiction. If you ever find any really cool fan fiction, you're more than welcome to send it my way. I always read it. But, so I understand building up a minor character to make them where they almost become a whole brand new person in your mind.
And that's what happened with the extended universe on him, and then the fans that... Because you look at fans of Boba Fett, it's mostly 90s people who got into Star Wars that are the fans of Boba Fett.
And that makes sense. But it's still one of those fandom things that, being a newer fan, I was confused by. Because I couldn't see it. And it makes sense, but at the same time, it's a weird fandom trope. The next fandom trope is Han Solo. I like Han Solo, don't get me wrong. Please don't blast me in comments. But, Harrison Ford didn't even want to be in the movies. That's what's so hilarious.
He wanted his character written out of The Last Jedi, and Lucas, he wanted, and Lucas wasn't there anymore. But with Last Jedi, they actually honored his request to actually die off. But even back in the day, during Empire Strikes Back...
Oh, you mean Force Awakens?
Yeah, Force Awakens, yeah. Force Awakens, they wanted that out of there and granted his request. But what makes it so amazing is that they were planning on returning his character for Return of the Jedi with the Carbonite, but Harrison Ford was like, okay, we'll do this, and he still came back with that. It's just one of those, he only enjoyed doing the first film, but kind of did not. And it's kind of amazing for a character who started off as a scaffolder for just a background worker that ended up just falling into acting.
But Harrison Ford's character, for me, he's actually a legitimate criminal. He's legitimately a bad person. Yes, the Empire is the villain. But not Harrison Ford, but Han Solo is actually a bad person.
If you put it into a D&D alignment, he's neutral evil.
Exactly. He's a bad character. He is a villain in his own right, but he's a villain with a heart. And normally that villain with a heart trope drives me batty. But he gets the girl in the end, which is probably a good thing, because then it would be a whole different terrible nightmare. Because when I first heard that Luke and Leia were related and I saw the movie, I'm like, wait a minute, they just wait.
Yeah.
But we won't go there. Because nevertheless, that, I have to say, is a very weird interest that everyone likes him, especially, which I don't recommend watching Solo because I've never been so bored in my life.
Even I was bored watching Solo.
And this is not to crap on anybody who likes Solo, because if you do, that's awesome. But I just,
it's a character trope, especially with Han Solo, in that villainous, but I'm a hero because I'm doing this because it's saving my own ass. It's not something that can really flesh out and hold its own story.
Well, and that's the thing. When you see Solo and you see the backstory for Han Solo, I felt it actually really ruined Han. And that's where the whole fandom thing for Han Solo is so confusing, is because you have all of this, and then you have Solo, which I know unanimously there's so many people who don't like what was done, but it ruined the character. So, but that and The Last Jedi were the two movies that we got so many death threats for, not to harp on this, but we got so much anger, we got so much fan outrage, we got so much frustration, and that's where the fandom really started personally scaring me, because I thought you had friends divided when it came to Doctor Who, or anime, or video games. It's almost like watching the McCoys and Hatfields and McCoys when it comes to Star Wars.
Yeah.
My lord, you have purists, you have newists, so to speak. You have CGI enthusiasts, you have practical effect enthusiasts, you have story enthusiasts, you have character enthusiasts, you have character model enthusiasts. If your character is not represented by a proper model type, and this means live actor as well, not just for video games, but for actual movies, if your character doesn't fit it.
And then you also have the ones that get so angry that this character was in the novels, or they were in the comic books. Why aren't they in the movies now? It's just like, the universe is so big that it needed to be streamlined.
Well, and that, I hate to say, is a terrible thing. It's a terrible lesson that everybody has to learn. When you come with a universe, there needs to be limitations. With any fandom, there needs to be hard-pressed limitations. That's why for the Doctor Who fandom, they limit to what's shown on TV, even though you have those audio dramas.
Well, some of the audio dramas in the Doctor Who official website actually states only the 8th Doctor's audio dramas are considered in the official canon.
Which makes sense. But you have to have those limitations. And George Lucas, he did a disservice to the fandom. But he also did a positive thing for the fandom. So the positive thing is he created such a dynamic universe with the first 3 movies that you could create your own backstory for previous to everything. You could create your backstory of how the world would fall out after the Empire was over. You could create so much intermingling between the time period of the 3 movies. And I have to admit, George Lucas had a great marketing strategy because he, along with the toy company, because they worked hand in hand, and if you ever want to understand a little bit more about the toy company perspective, watch the Star Wars episode of The Toys That Made Us. It's all I'm going to put there because it's a great narrative of how Star Wars really did take off, because it wasn't just him, it was the toys.
And not just also the toy companies, but the old Marvel Comics before Dark Horse took over. Rock Books, when George Lucas let authors that he talked to actually create their own stories in it. It's all that.
And so he did, between himself, between the toy companies, between the comic book companies, between the authors who wrote actual fan fiction, and I say actual because it was published fan fiction, better than Twilight, but
and they were actually sanctioned by Lucas and his company himself, that these were at the time in the canon.
And so he did such a service to the fandom because there's so many fandoms out there, and we're not going to name them because that's not the point of this, that don't allow that extended creativity, that don't allow so much more to be built up into the characters. And so George Lucas did a powerful thing, and he did a great thing because it came out in 1977. The last one came out in 1983. We didn't have another one
until 1999.
Until 1999. So you had a 16-year gap with nothing Star Wars, and he created such an outcry and an outpouring of creativity that encouraged people to stay with it while there was a drought of actual true content. Where he did a disservice, though, is by first doing the prequels, he cut off the legs of all the things that he said were canon. So I do have to say that for a fandom, that was a disservice, because all of your creativity, all of your effort for the authors, for the comic writers, even for the fans themselves, your creativity stopped because you got to see the beginning. And with the beginning being official, good, bad, or otherwise, it exists.
Yep.
And it's there.
And then when Disney took over the license, they were like, okay, because there is so much content, we really have no choice but to streamline this and create the official canon, the old extended universe canon. And they ended up doing that to streamline everything for a storytelling perspective on where they want things to go. But what Disney's done that I really appreciate, and more fans need to actually appreciate this, they're pulling fan favorite characters that were created in those universes, bringing in the authors, the comic book artists, and the comic book authors themselves as well, that worked on those characters, created those characters, and put them into the new canon. The biggest example with Rebels, Thrawn, who is a major fan favorite.
Well, and the one thing that you have to, as Ivan Nebula said, you have to give Disney its props. As a business, good, bad, or otherwise, some people love them, some people hate them, they know pop culture. Walt Disney, when he created Disney, his focal point was creating a world of diversity, of creativity, of pop culture. While pop culture existed long before him with pop art during World War I and II, it wasn't really until Disney started with Snow White and continued forward that he actually, truthfully, is the father of pop culture, good, bad, or otherwise. If it wasn't for what he created and what his business then continued on with, pop culture wouldn't be to where we're even doing a pop culture therapy session. So they understand how to hone pop culture because they have to. If they don't, they couldn't do what they do. So they understand that philosophy. And they do listen to the fans. Please, everyone, good, bad, neutral, right wing, left wing, just a regular fan, don't be afraid to speak up. That's not any intention at all. Because Disney does listen. As Evan Nebula said, they're bringing fan favorite characters. They brought in characters that were not in any of the other movies, not just creating them out of thin air, but seeing what was in the expanded universe. The problem is they can't use every character, they can't use every story because one, it is so large, and two, they don't really know without seeing either the sales of the books or sales of the comics or ratings for television shows like Clone Wars, which is coming back, or
Resistance, which is currently airing.
So they do see all of this. And that's the other great thing about the Star Wars fandom. And I think this is the highlight of it all, in my opinion, is your fandom, more so than even Star Trek, and I'm a bigger fan of Star Trek, and I have to give kudos where kudos is due. While Star Trek helped create cell phones and other random-ass devices, Star Wars is the fandom that really helped motivate creativity, that helped motivate other genres. If not for Star Wars, we would not have Gundam. If not for Star Wars, we would not have a lot of our other space age shows or space age books. And yes, I know that all ties back into Asimov, who came well before everything, but Star Wars created so much, and as we're spending an entire episode talking about it, Star Wars is still continuing to create.
And always look at this as a fan of it. Inspire by your creativity. Write that fan fiction. Write what you see.
Yes.
This is the fandom that has shown that the good for creativity leads on to be able to create these new ideas, these new projects. Everything that we've seen in pop culture today has some link, no matter how minor, back to the original Star Wars movie. That's how much influence it has had on somebody at some point, somewhere along the line, even directly or indirectly. And if you're an author, an artist that enjoys Star Wars or any fandom, take it, work with it, and then build on creating yourself.
And yes, that's very inspirational because it's so in our mind, everything. Because I think we even make jokes about the Force is strong within you, or all of those, and it's all because Star Wars. And I never even knew I was making those jokes until I actually watched the movies and I could see where the references of what I knew were coming from. So please, as Evan Nebula said, be creative, because even if you're just writing fan fiction for Star Wars, who knows, maybe this can be your creative source, or drawing art, or whatever. This can be your creative outlet that takes you to that next level. And segueing for somebody who's actually who's a huge fan of Star Wars, Silverquill, and I know this is not his only inspiration, but it's one of his many inspirations that he's used to do so much more.
And with that, we are going to sign off for tonight. We hope you enjoyed our little tangent, but really a therapy session for those fans. Be excited for episode 9. We get it this Christmas, since I know every Star Wars fan, whether they love it or going to critique it, are going to be there no matter what. Mm-hmm. But have a good night, and we'll see you on the next podcast. Good night.
Bye.